Okay. Alrighty, here we have the brain dissected. We are looking at the right hemisphere. And what we have here is right on the very top here, we have the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum connects both halves of the cerebrum, both hemispheres, and it allows for information to be transported between both hemispheres. That is the main purpose of the corpus callosum. Below the corpus callosum is this space. This space is known as the lateral ventricle. And below the lateral ventricle is this line right here, this piece of tissue known as the fornix. There is a membrane known as the septum pellucidum that extends from the top of the fornix to the bottom of the corpus callosum, effectively separating out the right and left lateral ventricles where cerebrospinal fluid is located. Then we come right below that and we have this round ball structure. This here is known as the thalamus. The thalamus is the main switchboard for all incoming and outgoing signals. Around the thalamus, I'm going to use a different probe. Around the thalamus is this channel here known as the third ventricle. The third ventricle not only goes around the outside of the thalamus, it also travels in between the two hemispheres of the thalamus. The thalamus also has a structure that connects both hemispheres known as the interthalamic adhesion. That interthalamic adhesion allows for information to be passed through both hemispheres of the thalamus. As you may or may not know or remember, that the thalamus is the main switchboard for all incoming and outgoing signals. Then right below the thalamus is this region right here is known as the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a major gland structure that is going to incorporate and hormones and activate the pituitary gland, which is connected by a tube known as an infundibulum right below here that has been removed once we cut open the brain itself. In the front, we have a structure here known as the optic chiasm. The optic chiasm is connected to the optic nerves that come from the eyes, and they transport the information to the optic chiasm. And then here we have an olfactory bulb. This is the olfactory bulb for the sense of smell, is going to sit on top of the cribriform plate and have nerve endings that line the nasal cavity. From the third ventricle around the thalamus, we have this little channel here, and this little channel allows for, the brain goes like this, goes through here, and this is known as a cerebral aqueduct that allows cerebrospinal fluid to travel not only from the third ventricle, but down through the cerebral aqueduct all the way into this region here in the cerebellum known as the fourth ventricle. This little dark line here is also a channel we will see later on when we do the spinal cord that is going to be known as the central canal, where cerebrospinal fluid will also flow down. The back of the brain, we have the cerebellum and the white matter inside the cerebellum, this tree-like structure known as the arbor vitae, also known as the tree of life. We have, when we look in the back of the brain, we pull it down this way, and if we open it up like this, we see here, this little structure is known as the pineal gland. The pineal gland is responsible for synthesizing and secreting melatonin, which controls the sleep-wake cycle. Right below that, and part of the brain stem here, we have the midbrain. On the posterior side of the midbrain is this structure known as the corpora quadrigemina. We have two parts of the corpora quadrigemina. We have the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. The superior colliculi is mainly for tracking moving objects, and the inferior colliculi is going to receive information from the inner ear. Then we move on down past the midbrain to this structure here known as the pons. The pons is going to be also responsible for the sleep-wake cycle as well as the rate and pattern of breathing. Once we pass the pons, we are at the base of the brainstem known as the medulla or the medulla oblongata, and it will activate the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerves to operate your heart and your lungs and all of that good stuff. We have on the outside here, what we have done is we have removed the dura mater, and the dura mater is basically several different layers. Right on the surface of the tissue itself is one layer of mater known as the pia mater. On top of the pia mater, there's a space known as the subarachnoid space that is lined with ependymal cells that synthesize and secrete cerebrospinal fluid in the regions in the three ventricles known as the choroid plexus. That cerebrospinal fluid is going to travel all around the brain, within all of the ventricles, around the spinal cord, and down the center of the spinal cord to keep it moist and protect the central nervous system. We have these bumps here known as gyrus, and the valleys on inside were all the known as sulcus. I said the first layer was the pia mater. Then we have the subarachnoid space where all of these vessels are actually located and floating in cerebrospinal fluid. Then we have a second layer known as the arachnoid mater, and then the outermost layer is the dura mater, which is made up of two separate membranes. The inner membrane is known as the meningeal layer of the dura mater, and the outer layer is known as the periosteal layer of the dura mater, and then you have bone that covers it on the outside. We also have a fissure that separates the two halves of the cerebrum, known as the longitudinal fissure, and then we have one major on the human brain. It's a lot larger than on the sheep brain. On the sheep brain, the frontal cortex is a lot smaller than on the human brain, because this is where consciousness and all that stuff actually takes place. But there is a fissure along here, actually a sulcus, known as the central sulcus, that separates the frontal cortex from the parietal cortex. Then, if we turn the brain around this way, we will see another fissure, and this fissure is going to travel this way. This is known as the lateral fissure, or the Sylvian fissure, that separates the parietal lobe from the temporal lobe. In the back, we have this fissure known as a transverse fissure, which is going to separate the cerebrum from the cerebellum. And then we turn it around, and here we go.
Yay!